Welcome. This is the Cisco CCNA ENSA, also known as the Enterprise Networking Security and Automation course. This course focuses on the CCNA version 7 curriculum. This is course 3 of 3. Next main section is about TCP and UDP vulnerabilities. So we already know that TCP and UDP are the layer 4 data header, or the layer 4 segments. The big thing is they have their own headers. And a lot of people don't realize that. So when we're looking at a TCP header, we know that because when we look at this header specifically, sequence number and acknowledgement number, right there immediately you know that's a TCP header, because UDP does not have either of those. Anyways, we're looking at the header, we're looking at the control bits. Are they a urgent? Is it an acknowledgement? Is it a push or a reset or a sync or a fin? All of that is controlled in the control bit section. That means we can look at how to manipulate those control bits to determine how this header is going to do things. If we are looking at a TCP functionality, we're looking at flow control, stateful communication, reliable delivery, because TCP does the handshake, the sync-ACK, or the sync-ACK acknowledgement section that through a handshake allows for communication. Well, that can also be a way to target a vulnerability. Here we have a sync flood attack. And what we do is, from the victim or potential attacker, we can target a web server. The attacker will craft the packet so that when the web server responds, they target a valid machine. And so we start opening these communication pathways when there isn't an actual web server. We manipulate the data on our packets so that we could target our victims. We have these session states that are open, but they go nowhere. Here we have the termination process for TCP. We have a fin, ACK, fin, ACK, and that allows us to tear down our communication. But there are ways to hijack these sessions before they're properly terminated. So here's a UDP header. You'll notice it is way simpler than our TCP. There is no acknowledgement, there is no sequencing. It is basically source and destination ports, length, checksum, and that's it. This is often used by DNS, SMTP, TFTP, and other things that need speed or have a real-time component. UDP flood attacks is basically where the threat actor will use a tool like UDP Unicorn or low orbit ion cannon, and they will flood the network with UDP packets. Let's look at other IP services, things like ARP. ARP is very vulnerable to attack. Here we have an ARP request because there is a broadcast for finding out the layer 2 data of a layer 3 address. So any client can resend or could send that ARP response, and there could be unsolicited ARP replies when we're trying to get legitimate network traffic to find the layer 2 address of a layer 3 device. Well, there could be cache poisoning, there could be poisoning of the ARP table, there could be reverse poisoning, there could be active and passive types of poisoning. And again, that's just where we're trying to get things to respond that have a specific IP address, but you have a threat actor respond with bogus data to fill the cache, and that would then poison that cache. There is a video looking through it as well in our lecture. Moving on, we have our DNS-based attacks, and that is where we have a DNS relay, or we have a resolver attack, or a tunneling attack, or shadowing attack, and basically where we're targeting DNS so they cannot provide the name resolution. DNS cache poisoning is very common, and again, that is where you spoof or falsify the resource records for information on a DNS resolver to redirect it to a legitimate site, to a malicious site. So if you're targeting the revolver, you may have google.com, instead of translating it to Google's actual IP address, you have it translate to a malicious site, and thus being able to use that to capture data. But there's also stealth-based techniques like a fast flux, and that's where the threat actor will use this technique to hide their phishing and malware delivery sites behind a quickly changing network of compromised DNS hosts. There are double IP flux, and again, that's the technique rapidly changing host names to IP addresses so that the security mechanisms in place in a network are more difficult to detect this type of an attack. Or a domain generation algorithm, and that's where the threat actor will use this technique in malware to randomly generate domain names that can be used as a rendezvous point for their CNC-based servers. Again, shadowing attacks, or where DNS domain shadowing, will involve the threat actor gathering the domain account credentials in order to silently create multiple subdomains to be used in the attack. That is still using a DNS server to create multiple subdomains and share those subdomains with other DNS servers so that the security appliances do not see the subdomains as threats, for example. Tunneling is where the threat actor will use DNS tunneling, and they'll place non-DNS traffic within the DNS traffic to obfuscate the data flow. When a security appliance sees things on port 53, they assume, oh, DNS traffic, but that doesn't necessarily mean it really is. There is a way to tunnel traffic through this DNS platform. So, examples might be a CNC server sent to a botnet. The 7 main steps are: the command data is split into multiple encoded chunks. The chunk is placed in the lower level domain name label of the DNS query. Because there's no response from the local or network DNS for the query, the request is sent to the ISP. Recursive DNS then occurs. The recursive DNS service will forward the query to the threat actor's name server. The process is repeated until all queries containing the chunks of data are sent. When the threat actor is receiving the DNS queries from the infected devices, it will send response to each DNS query, and then the malware on the compromised host machines recombine all the chunks of data to execute the command. Alright, so we also have DHCP attacks, and again, this is going to be following the DORA process. We can use DORA against itself to spoof data. Some common DHCP attacks are spoofing, modifying or incorrect configuration data, wrong default gateway, wrong DNS server, wrong IP addresses, wrong addresses handed out could be blackholing traffic. So assuming that the threat actor has successfully connected to a rogue DHCP server to a network, it could then hand out IP addresses for the wrong portion of the network. Again, blackholing traffic. We do have a lab looking at capturing DNS traffic and exploring DNS traffic. Not quite sure why this slide was placed after DHCP, but it was. The next main section is security best practices, and that is understanding CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, and understanding how this plays in the network. We also have a DID approach, or defense in depth, DID, and that means we have multiple appliances in our network as part of the security architecture. VPNs, firewalls, IPSs, IDSs, things scanning for email or web services, AAA services, Active Directory, strong passwords, administrative controls, and so forth. Firewalls prevent things that are not allowed from going into the network. IPSs or IDSs are a way to prevent intrusions. IPS is an intrusion prevention system. IDS is an intrusion detection system. IPSs are pretty active. They can do something. IDSs normally just monitor. An IPS, when a packet comes in, the IPS can actually drop a packet, could alert someone, could send a log, can do something. We have our ESAs and WSAs. That's an email security appliance or a web security appliance. That's going to be handling our filtering. Last main topic is cryptography. There is a video in our lecture or in our course about cryptography. Cryptography has 4 key elements for secure communication: data integrity, original authenticity, data confidentiality, and data non-repudiation. Integrity guarantees that the data wasn't altered in transit. Original authenticity, there is a guarantee level of trust that the person sending the message is the one that actually sent the message. There's also a hash message authentication code, or HMAC, that can provide a certain level of authenticity trust. Data confidentiality, basically only those authorized to see the message sees the message. Non-repudiation basically means there's a guarantee that the sender cannot repudiate or refute the validity of the message, meaning the sender cannot say, I didn't send that. They can't refute it. There is a mechanism that places that the sender actually is the one that sent the message. Data integrity, again, making sure that the message that was sent is the message that was received. There is no modification. The pay or the pay person or anything was modified. Hashing functions like MD5 or SHA verify the authenticity of that message, meaning it knows the message was sent, this is a message that was received. And these are just 2 of the well-known hash functions, not the only one. Since talking authenticity, this will guarantee that the person sending the message was really the person who sent the message. And we can do that through a hashing algorithm as well. Data confidentiality is a form of encryption, verifying that only those that are authorized to read the message can read the message. The 2 main forms of encryption are symmetric or asymmetric. Symmetric is the same key for encryption and decryption. Asymmetric is 1 key for encrypting, 1 key for decrypting. So again, same key for encrypting and decrypting. That's called a pre-shared key. We have things like DES or triple DES. Those are all older. AES is probably the strongest symmetric, and that comes in multiple bit blocks. 128, 192, or 256 key blocks, and that allows us to chunk the data in 228-bit blocks, 192-bit blocks, or 256-bit blocks. And those are the big 2. There's also SIL and RC, but AES is probably the strongest. Asymmetric encryption means 1 public key and 1 private key. There is a matching pair, 1 for encrypting, 1 for decrypting. And again, the bit length can be 512 bytes or bits to 4,000 plus bits. Moving past that, we have our key exchange, because there is a private key and a public key, there has to be some way to disseminate those keys. There is IKE, the Internet Key Exchange, and this is a fundamental portion of VPNs. We have SSL, that's used for securing our web-based certificates. We have SSH, that's for remote access. And we have PGP, and that is for email encryption. Since we're talking VPNs, we have different key lengths. We have a del hyphy, or DH, and again, that could be 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, and so forth. We have our DSS and DSA based keys, and those are for digital signatures. We have RSA, that's probably the strongest asymmetric encryption at the moment, and this is for encrypting algorithm for public key infrastructure. And we also have our elliptical curve. DH is asymmetric mathematical algorithm and is heavily used in VPN and SSL technologies. Basically, the Diffie-Hellman basically allows us to have a way to look at the simplifying of DH key argument. Basically, within a DH key exchange, beginning with basically Alice and Bob. We agree on a certain color, we can then add a secret color, and from there we get a private color, or a combination of the agreed color and our secret. From there, we can figure out our private colors, and looking at our secret color messages, we can be able to decipher what the final color should be. And I have a better message on our DH key exchange and cryptography in a separate video that kind of breaks this down a little bit easier to understand. And that is it for this module. If you got any questions or concerns, please reach out. Thank you.